We're live. Hey, Ethan, and hello to everyone at back home watching. How are you doing today?
Hey, Ron. Thanks for coming. It's good to be here.
Great to have you over. So let's begin. Let's just dive right into exactly what was the initial idea we had for the project and how we wanted to get started.
Yeah, so we kind of wanted to do like kind of a case study, focus on the pita. The pita is a bread, in recent years become very popular, ubiquitous. You can find it in any supermarket. And the interesting thing about the pita is it's over 10,000 years old. The origin of it is unknown. They know somewhere in the Middle East, but they know it started as a flatbread and eventually evolved to the circle we know today, the little pocket.
Wow, wow, fascinating. So what were you gonna go ahead and do with the pita?
Yeah, so personally, my favorite way to use a pita is shawarma. So as we know, pita is like a pocket, so you can cut it open it up, and fill it with various different foods. So my favorite version of that is shawarma. So our original plan was to kind of explore the pita with the grill and kind of combine it with shawarma, and show everyone what we like to eat and how we like to eat it.
Yeah, for the people back home, in a sentence, can you describe what shawarma is?
Yeah, so I like to think of shawarma kind of like it's very similar to Mexican al pastor, Greek gyro. It's a big cone of meat, kind of thinly pounded sheets, and it's stacked, and they cook it like vertically, so it rotates, and then when it's finally your turn, the guy takes a knife and just cuts it off, so you get like really crispy, juicy meat. It's really an experience.
Wow, sounds amazing.
Yeah,
So, but I heard that eventually we didn't end up going with that. So what was
yeah.
the issue with it there?
So again, yeah, we wanted to do this case study on the pita, and then we found ourselves 3 hours before Passover. And as for those who know Passover, you can't eat flour, you can't eat bread, leavened stuff, and we'll go into why a little later. We kind of found ourselves with like 2 3 hours before the start of the holiday, having to film this video. So we decided instead to pivot and bring you this instead.
Yeah, and just for the audience back home, if I could very briefly explain the whole idea behind Passover and what really we were celebrating was that many, many years ago, the Jews were enslaved people back in the land of Egypt. And at some point, the kind of Jewish people, they kind of got it as a whole and they said, kind of, we had enough. We don't want to live like this and we need something to change around here. The big pharaoh back in Egypt said, no, 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 it's going to stay like this forever. There's nothing you can do about it. Essentially, what happened was, according to the story, the Red Sea was split, and it was time for the Jewish people to go through and exit and finally leave Egypt. So what happened was everyone ran back home. They took whatever they could. They threw whatever food they had in the oven for a few quick seconds. They any bread that was there, they took along with them as they were leaving. And unfortunately, what happened was the bread didn't have time to rise. And when they took it, it was just very flat bread that didn't really cook all the way through. And it became what we today call the matzah. So every year we kind of celebrate it and we put ourselves in the shoes of those people that went through those struggles and kind of everything that went on.
Yeah, exactly. I like to think of Passover as kind of like it's a positive remembrance. A lot of like remembrance holidays are kind of like a downtone, but Passover is really an occasion to like, get together as a family or as a group of friends, and you recount the story together. You pass a book like person to person, and you read passages from the story of Passover. And yeah, that's where matzah comes from. It's we eat it to remind ourselves of the hardships of our ancestors.
Yeah, exactly. So just as a personal question, how do you feel about Passover? Do you like it as a holiday? Do you dislike it?
Yeah, honestly, it's one of my favorite Jewish holidays just because it really is about that sense of community and that sense of, bringing people together and celebrating the things that our ancestors have done that brought us to this day. And it's really an inspirational story. And I know you're a fan as well, correct?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's personally by far my favorite holiday. And surprisingly fun fact, it's actually the holiday that's most celebrated across the entire Jewish, worldwide distribution. And
Wow.
just to throw a quick number around 70% of all Jews worldwide, from secular all the way to extremely religious, they celebrate a Passover. That's, 7 out of 10 is a great amount.
Mhm.
Just in relation to, 50% fasted in Yom Kippur and 20% keep kosher. So, everything else, the numbers keep dropping and dropping, but Passover is the really one strong number that gets celebrated every single year.
Yeah. And like another fun fact that like even all Jews celebrate Passover, even Jesus, a very famous Jew, the Last Supper, famous picture, it's a Passover Seder. So even like
Exactly.
it really is just like the most celebrated Jewish holiday. Like you get that kind of vibes from it, and also the facts back it up. So I found it really interesting. I didn't know that ahead like before.
Exactly. It's a very little known fact, and it's very actually interesting when you find that out. The
Mm.
entire Last Supper was really just a depiction of, moments before at his final dinner, which happened to be a Passover Seder,
Hmm.
which is
Yeah, and
crazy.
yeah, it makes sense though. That Passover and Easter coincide every year, so kind of
Exactly.
connect the dots. But
And
yeah,
you
like you
can
mentioned, the whole thing was like our ancestors were escaping Egypt under the threat of the Pharaoh, and they had to just panic and get out with everything they could, and that's how we got to the matzah. right? To this like flat bread that's square circle. The circle's a little more traditional, but the square is like the regular one. The
Yeah, what does it
normal one.
taste like?
Yeah, and it's essentially just like a cracker like thing. It tastes pretty much like a saltine without the salt. I like to say.
Yeah. Do you like it? Do you dislike it? How do you feel about the matzah?
Honestly, I'm a fan, and it's not because matzah is good. I'm a fan not because it's good, because it's so versatile, and because it's a food in the heart. It's one that
Yeah.
you don't eat anytime during the year, but there's 8 days that you're only gonna eat this, and there's no bread, so you're like, bring it on, let me enjoy it while it's here.
Yeah. So what do you do with it? How do you eat it usually?
So everyone has their own ways. There's my personal favorite is you take a piece of matzah, break it in half, or you can take two pieces if you're especially hungry. Um, and then I like to take a Israeli chocolate spread. It's called chocolate shachav, and I like to put it both sides, make a sandwich, and that's honestly just the most delicious thing. I know people use Nutella too, but chocolate is in the heart.
No, I gotta go with chocolate de shacha.
Yeah,
Number one chocolate in the world.
agreed, agreed.
Yeah. I agree. I really like that too. My personal favorite is, the colored matzo bread. When you're frying an egg on the pan and you crack open a few small pieces, you put it inside. It comes out crunchy, comes out delicious, and really, that's my favorite by far.
Yeah,
On top of that, there are also like obviously very famous traditions that people use. For example, if you break it up into a million different pieces and make what we call matzo meal, from there you can go crazy and create, for example, matzo ball soups, which is it really became like an entire staple across really all Jews worldwide, which is insane. If you could, add to that.
yeah, I think matzo ball soup specifically is like a super interesting example because, like I mentioned, we Jews don't really like matzah. We just eat it 8 days out of the year, and we like it because it's our thing, but we don't actually like it. But matzo ball soup is interesting because it's like at this point it's transcended the holiday of Passover. And you can walk in right now to any Jersey diner, any Jewish deli, and get yourself a bowl of matzo ball soup, even though it's not Passover anymore. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. It's something that I don't think anyone would have ever expected to ever happen.
Mm,
That it's kind of like a food where the original idea was you kind of limit yourself for those 8 days to kind
exactly.
of a little bit punish yourself to put yourself in the shoes of those people that came out of Egypt with only the matzah in their hands,
Yeah.
and so we don't look at it that way as like something that's stopping us from enjoying life. Instead, we use it to actually make something we like even more and that we want to eat it on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly. That's just ingenuity. That's human nature, always pushing forward, always making things better. But honestly, I
Oh,
think I think a really interesting thing of the matzah that I didn't know, I've celebrated Passover every year since I was a baby. I know you do too. And one thing that I didn't know was really interesting is I personally always wondered, in the story it says they didn't have time for bread to rise. So why can we not eat everything else? Why can't I eat pasta? And in our research for this podcast, something really interesting that I came across was apparently the reason for all chametz or like leavened foods to be banned, including honey for some reason, which I found really interesting, is because it's kind of like a symbolic thing became over time. All of these foods were kind of they were considered chametz because they were like luxury foods that our people didn't have access to for 40 years
mm,
when they were wandering the desert. And furthermore, I found it also really interesting that like luxuries, like luxurious foods such as that, they were often sacrificed to the gods at altars. And that kind of like that was a sign of polytheistic religion, and a big thing in Judaism is remembering there is one God, and really highlighting the monotheism.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So on top of that, just as soon as exactly what you said, people, to eat the foods that they like to eat and to continue living their lives, they kind of look for very creative ways in which they can continue eating the food they like, but not break any of these rules and to eat any leafy bread, for example. So some of the things that we saw was, some crazy recipes out there. For example, people made entire out of matzo meal. They used it instead of like panko breadcrumbs and used it to fry foods, for example, and create like the chicken cutlet that we know out of matzo meal, which was absolutely insane. You know, we found also a crazy toffee recipe using a very specific flour and just a little bit replaced. And I think maybe you saw a few cakes, if you could mention that.
Yeah, I was really surprised. I wasn't. I was just expecting, like basic recipes, maybe sandwiches you could make, like stuff like that. But honestly, we found a link of recipes, and people were making chocolate cakes out of matzo meal and whole pizzas, and like, really just continuing to live their lives with these slightly temporary restrictions.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely insane. I don't think, like we said, I don't like to repeat myself often, but really, I don't think it's something that anyone could have ever predicted that we'd actually, find incredible ways to really enjoy it rather than, just suffer for no reason.
Yeah, exactly. Just make the best out of things, just like our
Make the best
ancestors
out
did.
of,
Stick to
the
nature.
person you're in.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, but now that Passover's over, cheers, Ron.
If you'll give me one
Cheers.
moment.
We can clink over a metaphorical beer. Beer is another thing that's not allowed during Passover, even though there are alternatives. But
Now that Passover is ending, we can enjoy this drink. Cheers.
cheers to the seniors.
Thank you
All right,
everyone
well,
for
Rob,
joining us today.
it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me. It was really fun to talk to you.
Please, it was my pleasure. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to all the people back home who sat with us, who learned through this lesson of Passover, and who really sat with us and enjoyed this entire time with us.
Thank you.
Bye.